My name is Rob Northrop, and I'm going to read Grand Theft Boblo by Rob Northrop. Chapter 3, Fish Thief. Evidence that I wasn't thinking with a clear head. 7 in the morning on a Saturday, I was out by the side of Kent Lake preparing for my first major act of piracy. I should have been home bitching about how they don't make cartoons like they used to, or snoring too loud for Angie as she finally came to bed after a long night of Talk Soup reruns and bubbly teen angst movies from 1987. Instead, I stood in damp sneakers looking across a curvy lake. Lots of little nooks and crannies of land poking out, and miniature bays wrapped in maples and oaks and whatever the hell they were. This was about 3 weeks after I stole the jet ski. After 2 weeks of heavily scouting lakes and rivers, after dubbing her the SS Jim Bacchus, painting her flat black, and rearranging the license numbers on the side so she wouldn't be recognized as stolen. Then finding the paint chipping off the next morning and calling a marina to ask them what kind of paint I should have used, and painting it again, high gloss black this time. Why did I name it the SS Jim Bacchus? It's hard to explain. I would have called it Queen Anne's Revenge or the Crossbones, but those would have been too embarrassing to talk about if I got caught. Arabella would have worked well, but no one would get it, so I settled on a name that would remind me of seagoing misadventures every time I used it. Jim Bacchus was the actor famous for voicing Mr. Magoo. He played bit parts in a lot of movies, including the hungover pilot in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. But his most famous role was Thurston Howell III on Gilligan's Island. I pulled my vessel off the tailgate of the Ranger, trying not to let it slam on the gravel. I had driven around the barricades on a hiking path, so I could get up close to the water and leave my truck in the woods. It would also help that I wouldn't be seen at the busy public boat launch where a single black jet ski setting out this early in the morning would be conspicuous. I was especially worried about the buzzing of the Jim Bacchus on the quiet lake, so instead of pushing her in the water immediately to seek out victims, I watched from the shore. She was sleek, the Jim Bacchus was, much too sleek and noticeable to buzz up and down rivers to mug fishermen. But fishers on lakes would be fine victims. There were some that could be dangerous, I figured. The kind in camouflage bass boats that double as floating duck blinds in the fall. Anyone that looked too outdoorsy in a Ted Nugent way could be packing heavier firepower than just Rapala lures. My victims would be the Wilford Brimley types. Somebody's unmarried Uncle Joe, the kind of guy who annoys the other fishers, jawing about what kind of bait they're using, how the weather looks. The little bay in front of me petered out into a marsh to my left, and opened into the main body of the lake to my right. A little peninsula, crowded with pines, blocked me from being seen by most of that wide-open part of the lake. For quite a while, there was only one boat in view. A black man about 30 with his 10-year-old son. They were in a rowboat with a trolling motor. The kid had his chin propped on his fists, trying to keep his head from being bored off. I didn't want his only excitement for the day to be getting mugged, so I let them pass. Can you believe that shit? I let them pass. Like it was my lake and I controlled the fates of all those foolish enough to venture across it. The boy kept snagging his lure on the lily pads in the corner where they had settled, so Pops finally reeled in their lines and trolled them back the other way. 2 more boats came past, one of them a flat-bottomed bass boat, tracing the shoreline from about 40 feet off. I ducked back a step so I could barely see it through the cover of leaves and branches. The other carried a couple of bearded guys in an old wooden ski boat from about 1962. They had poles sticking up, but didn't even cast them out while I watched. They shouted hello to the shore tracer as they came near, slowed to ask how the fishing was. The tracer had some crappie, hardly worth cooking, he told them. They waved and went their separate ways. The beards sped off to my left, where the trees were sparse and a field of cattails and weeds poked out of the water. The weeds looked like they defined the shoreline, but there was actually a patch of maybe half a football field of shallow water with reeds and lily pads growing over it. They shut off the motor and glided into the weeds, back about 20 feet into the marsh before they ran the motor in reverse and stopped. With a little more maneuvering and quick burps of the motor, they came alongside a pole sticking out of the water. The blond bearded man stayed in the driver's seat, while the other guy with a longer black beard stood carefully, set a 2-foot hunk of log on the post, and screwed it tight. The hole on the front of the log was just big enough for a wood duck to fit through, or maybe mallards? No, I think it's wood ducks they put boxes up for because they're kind of scarce around here. If it had been one guy by himself, I probably would have gone after him. People who put up birdhouses just aren't the kind to be carrying pistols. But 2 guys was a little more than I was ready to mug. For 15 minutes after that, nobody came in sight, except way off to my right where the duck dudes had gone to put up and take down and inspect more duck boxes. Everything in front of me was empty. It was getting on 7:45, and I know it starts to hit prime time for human activity around 9 or 10, so I was hoping to get this done soon. Then I heard a splash in the empty little bay straight ahead of me. It was one man near the far shore in a bass boat. Not a big fancy one, just a flat-bottomed boat with a Mercury outboard on it, and a little trolling motor beside that. His seat was perched atop a little rod, and swiveled like an office chair welded to the floor of his boat. He was casting away from shore some kind of big lure that made a plop when it hit the water, and slowly reeling it in. The man looked to be in his early 60s, judging by the gray and white poking out under his blue baseball cap. This was my man. I dragged the jet ski around a thorny shrub and pushed it into the water. The newly adjusted ignition with its half-assed wiring job had not yet been tested in the water, but it started right up when I turned the screwdriver handle. I pulled the ski mask down over my ears, not covering my face yet, revved the engine, or the jet, whatever, and stood her up at top speed. Straight across the lake toward him. I looked to the big open field of the lake for anyone coming, but they were all half a mile off or further. As I came closer, I pulled the mask down on my face, got it stuck on my nose for a second, couldn't see where I was going, but then it came loose and I could see through the eye holes. My victim was frowning at me like I was an idiot. He was kind of a round-faced guy, looked like an assistant school principal I once had, the one that suspended me for taking photos from the roof of the school. This wouldn't be that hard to go through with after all. The guy mouthed something as I pulled up along the back of his boat, throwing the jet ski into reverse to get it to stop where I wanted it. Better be some kind of goddamn emergency, fella. There won't be a fish biting for a half hour now. I didn't answer, stretching to grab the aft port corner of his boat, the back left corner as you face forward in case you're a landlubber. Plus I was still figuring what I should say to broach the subject. He said, "What the hell do you want?" I shouted, "Just a sec." Finally, the Jim Backus eased its side up to his back end so I could hold them steady. I pulled the knife out from under the controls where I had stowed it. The blade was maybe 5 inches long, but not very wide. In fact, the heavy wooden handle was wider than the blade. My dad used to have a set of knives in one of those wooden blocks you leave on the kitchen counter, and each slot in the block was labeled so you knew the name of the knife you were using. This one was either the fillet knife or the boner out of that set. And anyhow, we probably got the knives mixed up in the wrong slots over the years, so the only one I remember for sure was the little one being the paring knife. This one was a bad choice for intimidation factor, but if you're a chef, you know this kind can slip through a slab of ribs quicker than a cleaver. "Your wallet," I said, holding the knife out like a stiff action figure. I tried to guess what would look more menacing, pointing the tip at him or holding it sideways so he could see all of it. I knew not to hold it with the blade coming out of the bottom of my fist, like they do in slasher movies. Not as much control that way. That's what my dad used to tell me when we watched Friday the 13th. I showed it to him straight up. "I want your wallet. Pretty quick now, please." The fisher looked me in the eye like I was pointing a pencil at him. "Boy, have you ever heard of the United States Navy SEALs?" "Sir, you are not Bruce Willis. Please get your wallet now, because it'll be harder for me to dig it out of your pocket after you're in the water." "Tell you what, if you ain't here to offer your fish cleaning services, you better put that fillet knife away before I take it away from you and turn it on you. This ain't the first time I done it either." The thin chain hanging down to the water near my hand kept clicking on the rim of his boat. I lifted the stringer and found 3 bluegills. I said, "I thought bluegills had to be 6 inches to be legal." "You son of a bitch, those are already one of them 7 inches long." He reared back with his rod like he was going to swing on me, but then he stopped and held it straight out over the water. "Well, that's all right, 'cause bluegills are good eating, whatever size they are." I sunk the stringer again. "They're panfish, right? Isn't that what you call them when they're small enough to fit in a pan without being cut up?" He stared out over his rod, holding it low over the water. His line stretched out a good 10 or 15 feet before it came down to the calm surface. We were making a little wave action between our 2 boats, and I thought it was the wind blowing his line around that made ripples where it touched the water. This wasn't the wind, though. The line was moving, creating its own wake. I tugged on the rail of his boat until the Jim Backus was aimed how I wanted, then shoved off hard. Isaac Newton made sure the fisher's boat moved backwards, while Jim Backus and I went forward with an equal and opposite force. "Looks like your line must be caught on a log underwater, mister," I said as I started paddling with both hands toward the end of his pole. "Maybe I can help." "Cocksucker!" he screamed. The fisher jerked his rod away from me, but the line wouldn't move that easy. He could mess with the rod as much as he wanted, pulling it up till it bent and reeling in the slack and hauling it up again, but he couldn't move the line away from me when it had a separate force directing it from the other end. He had to stop when I got hold of the line, realizing he'd break it if he tried to whip it away from me. Now, I know there was a book that came out a couple years back about sodomy being commonplace among pirates, but that's no reason to call me an ass-fucking bitch and all the other names the fisher could think of. I showed him the knife alongside his line. He gagged and went silent. I lifted the line up and smiled. "This is either a sack of potatoes on the end of your line or a good-sized channel cat. What do you think?" 15 feet away, I could almost make out his pulse in the veins popping on his temples. He stared at the bottom of his boat, muttering, "Fucking disrespectful fuck." "Look," he said, You let me reel this sumbitch in and help me net it, I'll give you my cock-sucking wallet. Fair? Now you're catching on. He threw me a rope so he could pull me alongside his boat again, and handed me the net. It had a 4-foot handle so I could keep away from the pissed fisher and still scoop up his fish. I thought about stabbing him anyways after 10 minutes, but after 15 I was getting scared. Some eco-hippie in a kayak even came by and I thought the jig was up, but he just kept paddling with his double-ended oar. Must have figured there was nothing to fear from a masked man that was helping somebody net a fish. He kept rowing around the little bay and back out. I told the fisher to hurry the hell up. Shut up! I have to pull him in slow because I got the wrong pound line on here. If I jerk him too hard or quick, he'll snap it. And then where are you going to be? Finally, he brought the monster up within range of the boat, and this thing was about 2 feet long. I mean, I would have shit if it was swimming and saw that thing come up near me. As it was, my feet were in the water as I sat on the jet ski, and I had to hold the net between him and the Jim Backus when he wiggled over in my direction. Which is how I managed to net it. I held the net out to protect my feet, and the beast tried to turn around inside the net. I scooped him up and held him high. The fisher had his styrofoam cooler open, tossing cans of Pepsi and Pabst on the hull of the boat, leaving nothing but ice. I said. No fish till I get my prize. He mumbled, cocksucker, but got to his feet so he could pry the giant lump out of his ass pocket. He stood too quickly and had to wave both hands around to regain his balance. Actually, I said, you can keep your wallet. He turned to gawk at me and forgot about balancing for a second, had to pinwheel his arms to catch it again. I'm not really in it for the money. I'm in it for the power and the glory. I held the net and the catfish away from his boat, pulling the line tight, brought out my blade and cut the line. I pushed his boat from the back corner so it spin his bow in the wrong direction. Then I started the Jim Backus and goosed her forward for all she was worth. Those were my 3 seconds of triumph. I probably looked idiotic with my black ski mask and the little shark still spiraling in the net straight out to my side. But under the mask I laughed. I felt like James Bond. Better than James Bond because that sap does his tricks on behalf of Britain or the Queen or whatever. I won this prize for no one but me. 3 seconds of supremacy over the universe before I felt something hit me in the back. A low-fat, small-curd cottage cheese lid flopped into the net. I couldn't smell it until I pulled ashore, slowing enough for the stink to catch up with me. I'm guessing it was rotten liver, but it could have been any kind of meat stuck in a cottage cheese tub in the sun for 3 or 4 days. Better than any stink bait you can buy in a store. It must have been what my victim had been using to catch this channel cat. When I craned my head way around to see my spine, it looked like a condor had swooped over me and shit down the back of my sweatshirt. That cottage cheese container must have been brimming full of liver for him to heave it out and hit me from that far away. Still, it was worth it for those few seconds of elation. I didn't have time to rinse my sweatshirt off in the lake, because he was motoring over to me as fast as his outboard could send him. I ran through the brush with the catfish trying to flip out of the net, threw him and the net on the floor of the truck on the passenger side, and boogied back to pull up the jet ski. Old Jim Backus was feeling fat right then. I had to grunt and lift and drop her every few feet. When I showed my prize to Angie, she said, "Who gave you that?" "I caught it." I had the monster swaddled in the sweatshirt, so he couldn't jab me with the tip of a fin. I brought him past Angie to the kitchen counter and pulled out the cutting board. "With what fishing pole?" she said. "I went with my dad." Angie stared. "Are you having an affair?" "No." She kept looking in my eyes as if I'd wink or wiggle my eyebrows to let her know if I was lying. "Okay, Dad let me reel it in, but he hooked it in the first place, so it's not like I really, you aren't having an affair, are you? Would I do anything as conspicuous as bring home a 2-foot fish if I were trying to hide an affair?" "Well, maybe that's because you think I'm so dumb I wouldn't notice your clues. You think I met some young thing in the mall, went to her place to fuck her, and she gave me a catfish to take home as a bonus? Look, the last time I had sex was yesterday in the shower before work, and no one else was in the shower with me. Last time I had sex with another being was with you about 2 periods ago." Angie's frown was carved in stone until she heard 2 periods ago, and then she laughed. "How do you remember it that way?" "'Cause you used to get horny the last day or 2 before you started bleeding." "Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try to get happy with you this weekend." "Right, that would be nice." After Angie stopped interrogating me, the remaining tidbits of joy I had from stealing the catfish evaporated as I went through the only way to skin a cat that my dad ever taught me. I had to find a 2x4, nail the little shark's head down to the board, search for some pliers under the seat of the Ranger, and carefully peel the skin off with pliers. Fucking mess all over the kitchen floor. I tried to soak him in some red wine for a couple hours, but he'd never tasted very good. That is all for now. Next time, Chapter 4, Sunday Drive with Angie.